All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third stage event uh, in Eorzea for everyone, what Final Fantasy XIV gets right for queer gamers. Today, we're joined by three representatives from the Rainbow Materia Discord and LGBTQ plus Discord for Final Fantasy XIV. Before we begin, I need to go over the basics, same thing we went over last time. This event is a public stage channel and is being recorded. By attending this event, by participating in any Q&A, and or by speaking or performing during this event, you are consenting to audio recording of your voice and or performance, as well as video recording of your username and profile picture, even if you do not speak and or perform during the event. You also consent to the copying, creation of derivative works, use, distribution, and publication of the recordings and any postings on social media, public announcements, publications, websites, applications, and other commercial, marketing, or promotional materials produced by or for Discord Inc. without your review or approval worldwide and in perpetuity. Please refrain from using profanity or any obscene language or remarks during this event. As a reminder, Discord's community guidelines apply, in addition to our server-specific rules, and any violation of these guidelines, including any form of hate speech or bullying, is prohibited and may result in your removal from the event, the server, or Discord as a whole. Without any further ado then, go ahead and take it away.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey
Hello.
everyone.
How's it going? Thank you very much for joining us today. So yeah, we are representatives from Rainbow Materia. As was introduced, we are a LGBTQIA 2S plus community, or if you prefer, a queer community. We use both phrasings. So we'll explain that one a little bit before we get going, because it's useful to know the various definitions and why we use them. But first off, my name is Emily. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a transgender woman from the UK. And joining me are...
Hello. I'm Amy, also known as Amethyst Quill. It's Amethyst Quill, not Amy the Saint Quill. Everyone gets it wrong, don't worry. I'm a bisexual woman, and I use she, her pronouns.
And hi, I am Etro. I am a gay man and I use he, him pronouns.
Okay. So just before we get going, we've just got a couple of little bits that we wanted to kind of just touch upon before we really get stuck into things, just so you know what to expect, and a couple of the things that we might talk about. If you have been part of the community at all, you might be aware that there are some phrasings and terms that we use. So just for the benefit of anyone who may not be familiar, we just want to take a quick moment to walk through them. So the main one is that we will be using the phrase queer in place of the acronym LGBTQIA 2S plus, because it is a mouthful. It is an important phrase. It is an important acronym that we use because it is important to be inclusive of everyone. The reason we don't exclusively use queer is because that is a reclaimed slur. So it has been used against members of the community in the past. And so there is quite rightly sometimes a little bit of trepidation against using it. But most of the Final Fantasy community that I'm aware of are okay with its use. So we will be using it today to specifically refer to everyone in that community. So LGBTQIA standing for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, ace, two-spirit, and then the plus is to indicate that we also include a whole bunch of other identities. A couple of them think off the top of the head are poly people. Say a few others besides. This is the thing with the queer community, is that we comprise any identity that basically falls outside what society considers normal, including, in fact, straight and cis. because you can be queer and you can be straight, you can be straight queer and you can be cis. For example, if you're a transgender person, or if you are obviously gay or bisexual, whatever that might be. So the second thing that's worth noting is, because we're talking about the game and we're talking about the game's plot, we are going to be talking about plot points from every part of the game up to and including the latest patch. So though we will obviously try not to go too far, we're not going to be, cheerfully discussing the absolute latest thing that came out in game ruining detail. We are going to be referring to content from Shadowbringers, and it will be content that at least at one point was a spoiler. So we will try and flag it before we mention it, but we just wanted to mention it ahead of time, just in case anyone is sort of super behind and we doesn't want us deconstructing the plot points before they've seen them. As you will all know, we are performing in support of the Trevor Project. So we're part of the wonderful fundraiser that the Fantasy XIV subreddit and many other communities have been running this month. They are the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ young people. So they work to save young lives by providing support through free and confidential suicide prevention and crisis intervention programs on platforms where young people spend their time. So things like a 24/7 phone lifeline, chat and text. The organisation also runs Trevor Space, the world's largest safe space social networking site for LGBTQ youth, and operates innovative education, research and advocacy programs. So if you're in a position to do so and you haven't already donated to that fundraiser, I know that through the fantastic work of this community, we're already well over the original goal, but the more the merrier. If you're able to donate, that would be fantastic. So, without further ado, why is Final Fantasy XIV so popular with queer gamers?
Well, we could start with the fact that it's just a generally really amazing game. Should we start with that? Because
I've already need to start with that. That's the entire TED Talk. Thanks for coming.
Oh yeah,
thank you. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
No, but seriously though, I genuinely think that Final Fantasy XIV is probably my favorite game ever because it's such a well-rounded, smooth, and polished game. Like, the mechanics, every now and then they go through and update the classes to make sure that everything's balanced. They make sure that the story is really great. There's just so much work in making sure it's a really great game. And just in case you didn't notice, us queries, LGBTQEs, we're just like the rest of you. We like fun games too. Not to put too fine a point on it, but...
We are eldritch creatures from beyond the threshold of understanding, and we do not operate in the same space as you. No.
Yeah, eldritch creatures who also
about
like
this.
Final Fantasy XIV.
Oh, we're not
Emily,
supposed
we
to say
talked
that.
about this. We
we're
don't
not
give out our
supposed to say that.
secrets.
No.
Alright.
I just want to be free. But no, it's true. The thing is, the very baseline of any game that's going to be attractive and welcoming of queer gamers is, honestly, it's good. It's good from a very universal, general basis. Amy, what do I mean by that?
Well, there's so much in the game that I think appeals to us queer gamers as well as to everyone else, really. I think part of the fact is that, like, it's kind of a power fantasy, because, like, the warrior of, like, the character you play, like, they're a hero. They came from, like, boring, normal, like, background, but they are, in themselves, a true hero, and they stand up for the oppressed in most situations. Let's not get into some of the Beast Tribe quests. But yeah, that's, I think, a big part of it, at least for me. The fact that no matter what's happened to me in real life, I can log on and be a bit of a hero. That's quite appealing to me.
Yeah.
There very much is that sense of disconnect from everything too, because again, for a lot of people in the community, day to day can be stressful, and obviously we deal with our own stuff. So being able to log in, as Amy said, and have an escape and get to be a hero for a bit, it's appealing. It's addictive at times.
It's something that, obviously, if you're listening to this and maybe you don't consider yourself part of the queer community, you probably recognize this as well, right? Because this is very much why almost everyone enjoys the game, I think, particularly if you're here for the story. It's a very useful, it's a very nice world to live in. It's very much an imperfect world. It doesn't feel fake or forced or artificial, I suppose the word is the word. Obviously it is artificial, it's a game, but it doesn't feel like it's there just to uplift your hero and everything else is secondary to whatever you're shooting at today, as quite often game plots tend to be. Even very, very good games, the characters don't often exist outside the player's field of view. Final Fantasy is very good at creating, Final Fantasy XIV, sorry, is very good at creating a world that exists beyond the Warrior of Light. And it's a nice world. It's a world of magic. It's a world of nature. It's a world of technology. It's a world of lovely things and achievement and successes every time you log in, even if you clear it.
It's also a world of lots and lots of wonderful clothes. Glamour is the true end game, everyone. There's so many wonderful outfits in this game.
There are. It's a great. It ties in, I think, with the point we want to move on to next, which is the point where actually it's a way for players to explore their identities in a really safe, really welcoming environment. No one's going to mind if you decide to play this game as a cat girl, as an Aura, as a Lalafell. There's very little. I mean, okay, fine. There are the jokes, shall we say? But there is very little. Whatever you perceive yourself as in real life, or whatever the world perceives you as, you can log into the game, and that's what you are. And that's such an important part of why this works for us. It's very much an MMO thing, sure, but Final Fantasy does it particularly well. So, okay. Would you like to?
In a way, as much like Amy said, it's a power fantasy. It's a fantasy to live out the life people kind of wish they had. It gives people opportunities with likes of hobbies and all that, when likes of G-pose, and as Amy said, glamour is the end game. It's a good escape. It's a way to connect, especially now during the likes of a pandemic. People rely on connection more than ever. So it kind of provides a very healthy sense of comfort and solace, whether you're part of the queer community or not.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So, on the subject of glamours, one thing this game does really, really well is a lot of the clothing isn't locked in to a particular, should we say, gendered aesthetic. So there are some games, just to put this kind of briefly, I suppose, where if your character is female, you're wearing a dress and it is probably skimpy. And your options are going to be limited to what the designers of the game have decided is very feminine, very attractive. Whereas if you're a man playing one of these games, you're going to be wearing armor. You're going to be wearing fully covering clothes, unless it's to show off your rippling muscles. And that's very narrowly defined. Okay? So, Final Fantasy has... Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, I think the fact that, like you said, in a lot of other games, the armor is sort of gendered in a way, in that female characters get skimpy armor and male characters don't, basically. In Final Fantasy XIV, everyone can wear skimpy clothes. It's great. An example of that is the Dancer artifact gear. It looks very nearly identical on male and female characters.
Yeah, very much so.
And they are kind of getting to a point now where I know it's not the case for everything, but as time goes on, they are gender locking less and less outfits for people. I know there'll always be the exceptions, like race starting gear and things like that, that'll always be bound to race and class. But as things go on, people are getting more freedom to express themselves through the in-game glamour system. A point some people brought up to us, because we talked to quite a few people about this, was it was a really great way to work through the likes of dysphoria. Not necessarily being bound to, well, as Emily said, one aesthetic.
Very much so. And as so obviously I'm transgender myself. You can probably hear from my voice. And actually, one of the things that's kind of a bit of a weird thing about being transgender, especially if you're newly coming out or in fact don't necessarily know yet, is when you're looking at kind of the world at large, that transgender women tend to get forced into this kind of hyper feminine kind of you are now going to be in pink frilly skirts, full makeup, and paint your nails every day. And a lot of trans women very much enjoy this. A lot of trans women are very comfortable with this. But like with cis women, not all of us are. And one of the things that was really helpful when I first started playing Final Fantasy a few years ago was that I could actually experiment with an identity that wasn't necessarily hyper feminine. I could wear armor. I could wear what felt to me like normal clothing. It wasn't necessarily, skirts and dresses and pink and frilly things. It was, normal jackets, normal, trousers, or, more, should we say, sensible skirts, perhaps. And actually, for me personally, and for a lot of the queer folk we spoke to, particularly the trans and non-binary people we spoke to, it was a really important part of allowing themselves to express themselves in the game, but also understand their own identity a little better. So that's always something that's worked. There's something that they've done that's worked really, really well for us. And I think that it's not necessarily limited to transgender or non-binary identities anyway. Even if you're comfortable within your gender, the real world, again, it still likes to lock us into certain roles, right? No, very few men in the real world are going to be regularly wearing skirts and feeling comfortable in it. But you can in this game.
I mean, I
Why
think
not?
that men in the real world should be able to wear skirts whenever they want to.
Of course they should.
Absolutely.
Go on, Etro, go put on a skirt.
Okay, I shall be right back.
But I mean,
Jasmine.
talking of skirts, though, like, the fact that some of the gear isn't gender locked does mean that you occasionally get, for instance, one of the more recent crossovers in Final Fantasy XIV was the Near quests, and you can get, is it 2B's dress? And the guys can wear that without any restrictions at all.
Yep.
Including
That's
the boob
really
window.
nice.
It's actually fantastic.
Including the boob window, yes.
And
Yeah.
you could play it off as a joke, but at the same time, why not, right? Why shouldn't male characters or characters using a male model, whoever they might be able to wear the dress with the boob window?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
are there other games that sort of do something similar or do different things?
Yeah, so I think one very recent example of an MMO that's recently relaunched and has made a big change in this regard is Phantasy Star Online 2. Their new Genesis sequely, remakey, rebuildy, sort of whatever it might be, very unique new spin on that same universe. They've removed the gender lock from clothes completely, and it's an interesting way of doing it. And I imagine there's a lot of technical limitations that have meant that this route has been the best one for them, where rather than having all the clothes available for all the various models, and like Final Fantasy, you have different races of different, body shapes for the characters, different heights, and so on. Rather than deciding to, let's say, re-rig all of the clothing for all of the body types, they've decided that basically the characters now have a base body that you choose. So you choose the race, Newman or caste or whatever, and you choose type 1 or type 2. And they correspond to what used to be in Fantasy Star Online 2 like a male or female body. But when you then choose that body type, you can then equip any kind of clothing onto it. If you equip clothing for the other body type, your character just takes on that body type for a while. So it's a bit of a interesting way to do it, I don't think it's a bad way to do it, but it certainly is you want to wear the masculine clothes, you're going to have a masculine body today.
That's an interesting way of doing it. One thing that I've noticed about Final Fantasy XIV in terms of like physical character appearance is that like even when you've got like masculine characters and feminine characters, there's a certain level of crossover with them. So like you can have like a super buff, for instance, female Rogadine or a Highlander Cure, or you can have a super, well, sort of feminine, dare I say it, Catboy, Mikote. There's a lot of things in here that really allow players to pick whatever sort of body type they want. It'd be great if there were a couple of more options, like, you know, maybe some more options for instance, if your character's not able-bodied, that would be nice to show. And if your character was like maybe chubbier than others, that would be good as well. But aside from that, I think it's generally got a decent way of doing it.
Yeah, it's obviously a very interesting point that the game has only just, in the latest expansion, added a character with that is overweight.
Yeah.
And it's an NPC character. There are no options for player characters to take that on should they want to, which I think is something that is a bit of a shame. You know, it makes a degree of sense, I suppose, in so far as there's a lot of technical limitations in working with that. You get models stretching, you get texture stretching, that sort of thing, I suppose. But at the same time, I think it's there's so much diversity in how you can present in the game already that more is always helpful.
Yeah. Etram, are there any sort of gendered things in this game that you think you'd like to change? Etro, are you here? Oh goodness.
There we go. Sorry, muted.
Oh, there we are.
Are you looking
But
for your
yeah,
skirt?
no. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I just went on a great big search for it. I suppose something we talked about before was the animations for, well, specific races and classes and obviously genders. So I know something I've talked to people about in particular was, for example, the Dark Knight Idol pose. Because personally, I much prefer the female pose, whereas obviously I play a male character, so that's not an option to me. So that's something I'd really like to see opened up to everyone, because I know limitations are there, but they're all assets and they're in the game.
Yeah. So the female pose is the
be a
one
great-
where the character sort of has the sword down in front of them, right?
Yeah, whereas the male one is the totally not Cloud Strife pose.
Yeah.
It's the guts pose, isn't it?
Exactly.
You know, in honor of Berserk, that's where it came from. It's definitely become the Cloud Strife pose now, hasn't it?
I suppose we should sort of, you know, count ourselves lucky though, because I know there's other games that have like entire classes locked by gender, and Final Fantasy XIV doesn't do that at all.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
is it Black Desert
we can
Online has
say-
like a bunch? No.
Yeah. I mean, all I was going to say is we can complain about a lot of things, but in reality, the devs have spoiled us for choice, and we have a lot more freedom than, for example, the likes of Black Desert Online, or in some cases, the likes of WoW as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you mean like with the body types for World of Warcraft? Because I've seen some of them and they are very different, very extreme.
Exactly, yeah. I suppose in a sense too, we can be much more, they're much more relatable to us because, well, WoWs can be, as you said, a bit much at times, depending on your own preferences. But
Oh, yeah, true.
considering the way Fantasy is presented, it can, again, be much more relatable to some people.
Yeah, and I think the good way to illustrate that is that with World of Warcraft, there are obviously great varieties in body types and presentations, but there definitely is this tendency to make like hyper masculine characters or hyper feminine characters and different variations of that rather than having the freedom to choose. So it's something that we've I think we glossed over earlier a little bit, but even within say for example you want to play a male character, you could play an Alesan or here Midlander or Highlander or a male Aura, for example, very much so, and they're very masculine characters. They are in some cases tall, they are muscular, they are chiseled, jawed, and obviously that's fantastic, and that's what a lot of people want to play. So they got that option, but you can also play a slightly more androgynous, maybe feminine is the wrong word, but certain male Makote options, for example, are a little bit less chiseled protagonist, shall we say, than others.
I suppose that kind of leads into another nice point of something that they could add down the line would be something more androgynous, because obviously not everyone's going to relate to one or the other.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, there's one thing that I've noticed quite a lot is that there's absolutely no recognition of non-binary genders in the game, as far as I can tell, at all. Canonically, obviously, you can create your character and do whatever you want with your character, but in terms of how the game actually recognizes you, there's not really much that you can do with that, which is quite a shame, really.
Yeah. So one of the fair, the temples of the queer community is non-binary gender identities, which is where someone doesn't basically look at male and female and goes, "Yep, I'm that," or "I'm that." They go, "I'm somewhere," So some non-binary folks identify as both genders, neither gender. Some they might be gender fluid, which means their gender identity shifts. So a lot of our community like to use, for example, they, them as pronouns. So it wouldn't be, say, he went to the shop or she went to the gold saucer. It would be, they went to Bosja. The game doesn't let you use this these sort of pronouns at all, which is a shame, and it would be a nice thing to see, as well as just more general recognition of the fact that there are more than the strictly defined kind of gender roles. They, as we say, they do quite a bit to subvert this in a few ways. They don't subscribe to, appearance-wise anyway, forcing players down one side of the gender binary or the other. But I've seen certain edited screenshots, for example, where they've taken a male character, but they've actually used elements of the female body to make a much more gender neutral, much more androgynous character, which is a lovely thing. And actually, it's a really nice thing to see. That particular artist was able to express themselves, obviously, by editing these screenshots in a much more effective way. I'd like to see that happen come to the game itself, within reason.
Yeah, I think the amount of variety. Oh, sorry, one sec. Throat had a bit of a moment there. The amount of variety that we have in the game is actually really quite wide, but it would still be good to have a couple more options.
Yeah.
That being said, though, one thing that I do really like is that no matter what character you pick, no matter what gender you pick, or class, or even race, really, it doesn't actually make any difference to the story. The most that you get is a couple of little, maybe extra phrases. I think, for instance, if you're an Aura, when you go to the step, maybe one or two of them will mention, "Oh, hey, you're an Aura, so are we," because that's where they're obviously all from. Well, some of them are from. But aside from that, it's really mostly just flavor text. It doesn't actually make any difference in canon as to what sort of character you are. Which I think is really nice, because I personally wouldn't want it to be restricted. I wouldn't want to go to a place and be like, "Oh, well, I'm a Rogadine, I can't go in here. That sucks."
Yes.
Yeah, they very much provided us with an even playing field as far as the game goes, and it leaves things, very open to everyone. I think, and this is going to be somewhat spoilery and not necessarily to main story, but more of an Easter egg, is the only thing that I found in the game that is locked to a specific race is in one of the Shadowbringers areas in Tomra. There is there's housing specifically only accessed by Lalafels, And other than that, I can't think of anything else that is actually race locked or anything along those lines.
Yeah.
So they're very good about making things accessible to everyone, regardless of whatever you identify as.
Absolutely, yeah. The houses in Tomra, of course, are more of an Easter egg anyway. You're not locked out of anything by doing it, which is a nice thing. I wanted to, by the way, quickly clarify something I said just a little bit ago when I said allowing more of, obviously, more identity presentations within reason. What I meant by that was these kind of changes that we're talking about, they're technically very, very intensive to implement, which if you've been following the whole situation with male Viera or female Hrothgar, you'll be well aware of the fact that the devs have to do a significant amount of work to add these different identities to the game. And actually, one thing that I would love to do is actually to say right now, how grateful we are to the devs for taking that time to introduce the two Shadowbringers races and actually expanding them to offer both male and female options. It was a big missing feature in the game. It felt really out of place compared to everything else in the game. And as much as it was readily understood that this was a factor of time, right? Time and budget and technical ability, because they just didn't have time to implement them. It was a really lovely thing that they took the time to fix it, even though the raw numbers, the statistics, the how many players play each individual race stats don't necessarily bear out the need to add these. The community is obviously very keen, particularly on male Viera. I notice, at least in the Western communities. Perhaps a little less so on female Hrothgar, but the demand was very much there. And just because it's a small demand doesn't mean that it shouldn't be met by the developers.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And just gonna look back to a little bit to one thing you just said about how grateful we are to the devs for some of the things that they've done. Hey Emily, do you remember that thing that we did almost 2 years ago so that we could get our lovely 2-seater chocobos? Eternal bonding.
Eternal bonding or weddings, yes.
Yes.
Okay, Etro, what's great about eternal bondings in this game?
Everything. Well, no. I
Good.
mean,
I like the Moogle.
yes.
I like that you can have horribly decorated. You can decorate the chapel in such a horrible way, and it's great. So
I mean, yes. It's a great way to get all of the garish ideas out of the head now. I mean, the great thing about that is because, well, Yoshi P went out of his way and he made it accessible to queer characters, and obviously, again, not race locked. The gear you get, your wedding suit and your wedding dress, completely changeable, but both male and females can wear both. And, after the fact or even before the fact, you can go and exchange that and go, hey, I don't feel like wearing a suit. I actually want to wear a dress. And that is completely okay. There's small, subtle things like no one's necessarily bound to any role in the wedding, because in the wedding itself, you get a little bouquet and there is the freedom to give that to whoever. So again, it's one of those things that they've left us with a lot of freedom that you don't necessarily get in other games. Again, well, that too, it doesn't really focus on things like romance or that necessarily, because it can be a lot of different things.
I think just one thing that you may have forgotten about eternal bonding, one very small yet very important thing: you can marry whoever you want. It's great. You don't have to have like a male and female character get married. You can be female and female or male and male. It's great. It's not so great for any sort of polyamorous people because you still have to be two. But other than that, you can marry whoever you want, really, as long as they're a player.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't actually marry Thancred yet. Sorry. maybe in the future. Eh?
Someday, I'm sure.
Yeah. Actually, no. This game. No, it's no. You can't marry Thancred. This game's no good at all. Why would no, I'm kidding.
No, absolutely not. We're going home. My night is ruined.
Can't marry Thancred. We're logging out. Sorry, guys.
Oh dear.
Honestly, like Etro said though, it is really good that the game doesn't actually have that much of a focus on like relationships at all. Like, yeah, you can get an eternal bonding, but other than that, like, how many characters even are there who have relationships in the game?
Well, again, minor spoiler. There's only a handful of ones that kind of come to mind. The Chai's Newmore example. You have NPCs outside of Wanderer's Palace.
They're a
Who,
gay
funny
couple,
enough,
aren't they?
they are a gay couple,
Yeah.
and obviously that's not massively presented. They've actually they've been kicked out for funny enough being an interracial couple, but the fact that they are gay is not really brought into it. It's flavor text for the whole thing more than anything. Um, Only other real couples that come to mind is it's somewhat hinted that Urianger and Moonbreeder, but that is up for debate. Um, but then again, the relationship between Urianger and Moonbreeder was presented in a somewhat androgynous way, so I think that's up to everyone's own interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
I
could.
think. Oh, you go.
Okay. I think that particular one as well was it's easy to read, I think, as a player as either being romantic or as platonic or even as obviously a teacher-student relationship. And they give you the freedom to kind of interpret that whichever way you feel most comfortable with, which is a very nice way to do it. They do that a couple of different ways in this game, a couple of different things. One of the nice things about the game, and this is something that's particularly relevant to our ace and arrow communities, so the asexual and aromantic communities, is that there's very little in the way of overt romance in the game. So the characters that are in a relationship, they're just there. They're not. It's not remarked upon. You're not seeing grand stories of these characters getting together. Really, they're just together. It's just a normal relationship, right? That's a really nice way of doing it because actually, if you're looking for it and that's what you want to see, you see it. It's a good thing to do. If you are someone who might be romantic, might have no particular interest, honestly, in seeing romance in the game, it doesn't put too much focus on it, so you can choose to ignore it if you want to, which is a nice
Yeah.
thing.
And I know that a lot of games don't have like romance options anyway. It's kind of a more recent thing to have romance options in general anyway, but I've heard a few people say in other games, like for instance, I'm a big Dragon Age fan, the romance options are a big part of that. There are some people who feel like they almost miss out if they don't do a romance. Whereas, because it's obviously not a thing in this game, there's nothing to miss out on.
Yep, absolutely, which is nice. So I suppose obviously the
Plus-
main. Sorry, Etro.
Oh no, just some more examples as well that also kind of work upon that whole romance aspect is Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls are a good example, and then you have the likes of Mass Effect, which it also comes into there. But I suppose in a way it's there, but as Amy said, some people feel like they miss out on it, some people don't. I think when it comes to gaming, it's very important that people feel that they have that freedom.
Yeah. So on a kind of a similar note, although there are relationships in the game, there are couples in the game. One thing that's a little bit more vague because of the nature of this game and the fact that it is a Japanese studio building this game in a particularly conservative environment in some cases, mostly Square Enix is bored, let's be honest, but they sell this game all over the world, right? So there's a lot of different perspectives that they should be taking into account. But there are still characters who can be read as queer. In some cases, I think we could even interpret them as being intended to be queer, just presented in a way that you could miss if you wanted to. So, Petro, who do you think might match that description in Final Fantasy XIV?
Yes. Well, again, spoilers. For both Heaven's Ward and most recently Shadowbringers. But three examples that come to mind would be Hoshifont, And then on the Shadowbringer side of things, both Reen and Gaia.
Horsefont's an interesting one because Horsefont's an example of, I suppose perhaps the better phrase to use would be player-attracted character, where Horsefont's dialogue doesn't change based on your character's gender. It doesn't change based on really any factor of your character, actually. Horsefont is attracted to your player regardless, which is, again, it's kind of presented in a way, particularly in the English localization, where you could potentially miss that if you wanted to. If you weren't necessarily looking for it, for example, you may not see his dialogue lines as flirtatious, for example. Although in the Japanese, there's a very different dynamic there because there's a bit of a stereotype, I suppose, of very hyper flirtatious male characters, which Horsefont leans into quite strongly. Which, if you translated that to English directly, it would come off as a little bit much, right?
Yeah.
They tone it down a bit for the English localization, and I think that's probably the wise idea. But
Yeah.
it's not removed completely by no means, and he is very much interested in the player character,
Yes,
regardless of who you are.
Horsefont's type is strong, powerful, and godslayers.
So, depending on your player character, Horsefont can be, presenting as straight or gay, or some variation thereof. We don't really know, let's be honest. And it's a really kind of lovely thing to see because they don't take the route out of it that they could do. There are dialogue variations in this game, as we've touched upon, and as we've touched upon in other situations, it's not really any different between the two selectable player genders, right? So they could have toned down the, should we say, queer undertones for Horsefont, should they wanted to. If they wanted to, they could have changed his dialogue lines based on, if he's interacting with a player character of the same gender, they could have made it much more platonic, more deliberately platonic. They chose not to, which is nice. It feels very inclusive. Might feel like an overused word, but it is.
Yeah. It's a nice choice that they made, and it's especially nice because they must have made that choice way back when they were doing Realm Reborn. So this is like going back right from the very start. Whether they wanted to make it an active choice or they were just like, well, we can't be bothered to write two sets of dialogue depending on if you're male or female. Regardless, he's player attracted now. Can't take it out. Can't take it away from us now.
And to be fair, Yoshi P doesn't necessarily strike me as the can't be bothered to do this type.
No. In fact,
of course not.
May I read a quote very quickly from Yoshi P himself? It's regarding the genderlock clothing, but I think it applies here just as much, to be honest with you, which is from an interview, I believe, published on Kotaku before Shadowbringers came out. And he said, to touch upon the second part of your question about gender restrictions, first and foremost, I think there should be freedom in your values when it comes to the different genders. We don't want to restrict attire and clothing that you wear based on character's gender or sex. Let me give you an example. I was heading to the office on a Saturday, and I saw a situation that made me very sad. I was trying to go into the office, and I was waiting at a red light. I saw a high schooler coming from the other side of the road in their school uniform. It seemed that they were biologically male at birth, but they were wearing a seilafuku, which is traditionally female attire. In Japanese high schools, there's more and more schools that are accommodating for freedom of not being restricted to a specific gender for your uniform. That person probably wanted to present the gender they identified with in their heart. So, on the other side of the road, there was a mother and daughter. The daughter was perhaps 5 years old. As soon as the mother saw the high schooler, she shielded her daughter as if she didn't want her daughter to see. A high schooler must have been very hurt. Situations like these still happen, and there's areas where there's not as much understanding. So that said, we want to address this, in this case, the gender restrictions, the fact that at the time the wedding attire wasn't, was still gender locked. We want to address this. And I think it would be gradual. For instance, for the ceremony of eternal bonding, we've already started to make adjustments. Once we officially release this, you won't have gender restrictions. If you both wanted to wear a dress, that's perfectly fine. If you both want to wear the tuxedo, that would also be fine. And so that's something that it was said before this was implemented, but in fact it was, which is really lovely. So the nice thing is that we're not reading this into the game. We're not sort of interpreting this based on the way the game works. The devs have come out and said, Naoki Yoshida himself, the director and producer of Final Fantasy XIV, has said, yeah, actually, this is what we want to do. The things that we are identifying in this discussion right now, a lot of them are deliberate.
I think it's like really heartwarming as well to know that the devs are kind of like, they try to understand our position and they try to implement it. I think it'd be great if it was a little bit more obvious, but honestly, part of it might just be a localization issue, as with Washfont and also with Reen and Gaia, if I may move on to that.
Go ahead.
So with Reen and Gaia, these are characters who are in Shadowbringers in the 8-man raid series. So if you haven't finished that, this is your warning to tune out for a few minutes. There is a very strong chance that they're lesbians and that they're in a relationship with each other. Because there's so many points where, like, they have that sort of coffee biscuit date where you see Reen just, like, really nervously going up to Guy and being like, do you want to share coffee biscuits? And it's absolutely adorable. And there's a series of sort of mini scenes in E12, just the last in the raid series, where, like, you see this coffee biscuit date. You see Gaia has, like, this ice necklace, and she's like, oh, I wanted you to have it. And it's like, oh, who should be having it? And there's also a point where they, like, both try on lipstick. Where I think it's lipstick. It looks like lipstick to me. They're both comparing, like, something, and Gaia's like, that's my colour. You can have this one. And it's really nice to see, like, even younger characters have, like, relationships with each other. And the thing with this, though, is that what I've just said could very easily be interpreted as just friends. They're just gal pals. That whole thing. Because the way that localization and translation works, it can be really difficult to actually translate everything accurately. Translation is just as much an art as it is a science. And when you're translating something, you've got to think not just like what are the actual words presented to you, but also what's the meaning behind them. Why are they saying these particular things in this particular way? So to a Japanese audience, it might read like, of course they're dating, of course they're, two teenage girls starting off on their first relationship. But to a Western audience, it might be like, well, I mean, are they? What do you guys think? Would you agree that they're dating? Or do you think they're just friends?
I mean, personally, I'm of the opinion that that's kind of up to the individual's interpretation. It's, as you said, for example, the sequence you mentioned, each one is presented and is titled as a treasured memory. That doesn't necessarily lean one way or another. Personally, I think they've tried to present it in a slightly more romantic manner, because more of a background feature, there is a crystal in the area. And not too subtly, as the story progresses, it gradually turns into a rainbow. And I don't think that was done by accident. So that's just kind of my own interpretation of it. But again, that is open to the individual.
Yeah, I think it's very deliberately engineered so that if you want to see it that way, it absolutely can be read that way. And I don't think we'll ever really know what the intention was. I'm not sure they'll want to say if asked, because I think they're not really at a point yet where they want to just come out and specifically say, yeah, these characters are, they're in a same-sex relationship, or they are queer in a way that, like I say, may not be acceptable to some of the players or some of the other forces involved in the game. And like I say, Square Enix shareholders, for example, may or may not be supportive of this sort of thing. And the game is available in, I can't remember the exact number of this, but they said it at FanFest, a lot of countries now, a lot, all over the world, some with different perspectives on queer relationships than others, shall we say. So it's thing that I don't believe they've really got the freedom to make it unambiguous and to basically turn around and say, yeah, here are these primary characters. This whole storyline is centered around them and their relationship, and we're outright going to say, yep, this is what it is. We would like that, but realistically, it's not the world we live in right now.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, sorry,
Go
you
ahead.
go on. Don't know which one of us goes first.
who can outpatience the other? You go first.
I mean, the only thing I was going to add there was whether it be romantic or platonic, something they have done with their relationship is they've taken the whole damsel in distress idea and they've kind of flipped it on its head, because for the I believe it's, is it E8? No, is it?
Which one?
Oh,
What happens in it?
Refulgence. Either way, there is a scene where bad things happen to Reen, and Gaia comes in as, well, for sake of metaphor, the knight in shining armor to come rescue her. Whereas a few days later, the idea is flipped on its head, and it's actually Reen coming to rescue Gaia. So, in that sense, they've taken what is considered a traditional, well, I'm going to say, power dynamic, and they've flipped it on its head.
And it helps that
So-
both scenes are really cool.
Yeah.
They are
very
both
cool.
very cool. I think the main thing to take away from this is, regardless of obviously romantic or platonic, their relationship isn't set to any standard norm, and I think they've gone out of the way to make that very clear.
Oh, honestly, just regarding clarity, different games have like different ways of presenting queer characters and queer player characters as well. So, one question that I have for both of you, and this is more of a rhetorical question because I think it's something that will change depending on who you are. Just how much should a developer try to recognize like a player's gender or sexuality in a game, or a character's gender or sexuality, without putting too much focus on it, without it being like the main thing that defines them?
I mean,
I think. Well, go on, Etcher.
go on, Emily. No.
We're
No
doing
more
it again.
Welcome to our talk. It's the patience game, really.
Oh, dear.
No, I mean, I think if a developer is willing to put it in there, it should be there. But it shouldn't be so in your face that it becomes a plot point. It can very easily be there, and if someone wants to go and look for that and, have something to specifically relate to, they can find it. But vice versa, you might get someone who has no real interest in someone's or a character's personal identity, what they, relate to. They might just be there for the game's experience. So I think it's a case of it should be there, but make it, I suppose, what's a classy level of representation? I suppose is the question.
Yeah.
But yeah, you want it to be representative, but you don't want it to be kind of exploitation, do you? And it's a fine balance to find, isn't it? Because when you talk to queer people and you ask us, okay, what do you want to see? Do you want to see queer characters represented in the game? And we're going, of course, yeah, we want them to be there. We want them to be visible. Okay, great. So one thing, there's actually an interesting example in the game. And it's really interesting because I, a transgender woman, did not know this existed until I was doing the research for this very talk. And that is a trans woman NPC, Zoe Cho, part of a side quest in the Derelicts, in the Shadowbringers expansion, who, as I mentioned, is openly transgender. And it's never, ever remarked upon. It's something that actually I totally missed when playing the game. So, in the most extreme of senses, if I'm saying I want queer characters, queer representation in the game, and I really don't want it to be a big deal, I just want them to be there and to exist, that is the absolute extreme of that. There is a character who is there, who exists, who is queer, and is absolutely irrelevant to the point that I didn't even notice it was there.
I think I had to point her out to you, didn't I?
You did. You absolutely did.
And someone,
I was like,
honestly, someone pointed her out to me as well. I think I saw on Reddit, like just after Shadowbringers came out, that a couple of people were talking about her.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Are you two telling me you don't know every single detail about this game that we spend how many hours on a week? You are both fake fans. I am disgusted. My night is ruined. Goodbye.
Yeah, fair enough.
Look,
Well,
I'm
it's
just
been-
here for the glamours, okay?
Yeah, I haven't been
that's
cancelled in a
fine.
while, to be fair, so it's fair enough. Really, it's about time. No, but in all seriousness, like it's an interesting kind of balance you have to find, because you've got that kind of like one extreme. But if we could jump into a different game for a moment, there is Dragon Age Inquisition, one of the RPG from BioWare, very, very popular, and there is characters in this game where they are, I think they're the major supporting characters, where their queerness becomes key plot points. And actually, there is Dorian, who is a gay character, I believe. Amy,
I know this. So Dorian is a gay character who comes from. It's obviously a fantasy land. Well, Dragon Age is set in a very fancy area. Dorian is a gay character who comes from a very conservative place, and he leaves because he doesn't want to marry a woman, and that's kind of like the only thing that he's allowed to do. He's actually one of the main characters that you have as like one of your companions who will play the game with you, and he's actually a romance option if you're a male character in Dragon Age Inquisition. And the thing is, like, him being gay is like quite an important part of who he is as a character, and it really informs a lot of who he is because it's something that he's had to radically change his life around. On the flip side, there's also Krem, who is a trans man, who's not a character that you play alongside, but he like shows up a couple of times. And what you can do is, when you talk to Krem, you can actually ask him like, "Oh, hey, what's it like to be trans?" Like, not necessarily in those words, because I think the word trans doesn't really exist in the Dragon Age world, but you can talk to him about it. And if you misgender him, you get called out, like, immediately, which I think is great that you get called out, but personally, the fact that you even can misgender him is kind of like, that's too much for me. I don't really want the ability to do that. As much as it's like, you know, arguably restricting free speech or whatever, I think you should respect people's identities, even if they're video game characters. So, on one side, we've got Zoe Chaw, who is a trans woman who is completely missable unless you know what you're looking for. On the other hand, in a different game, we've got Krem, who's a trans man, who you can go so far as to, like, misgender him if you want to. And it's like, where is the balance here? What's the right thing to do for these two characters?
Somewhere in the middle,
Yeah.
It does very much make you question when it comes to representation. When does representation turn into exploitation?
Yeah.
Yeah, how much of that misgendering thing was the developers deciding that they wanted to make a statement, and so they sort of pushed this idea into the game, obviously clearly with perfectly good meaning, but in a way that's like, okay, as a transgender woman myself, I'm quite used to being misgendered. You can hear my voice, you can see why it happens, right? Do I want to be able to do that in the game, or have that kind of represented for me in great detail as if it's something great and tragic and interesting, right? But at the same time, it is a thing that happens. It should have some sort of representation, right? That might be a line that you might take. I think it's one of those things where I think everyone's going to have their own opinion on this one. There's definitely going to be a different line in the sand for everyone about how much they want to see realistic portrayals of queer characters, as opposed to people who, they may just want to, they want to live in a fantasy world. They want to hit dragons with swords and, slay gods for fun and craft lots of biscuits and make money off of them.
Delicious coffee biscuits.
I suppose, in a way, it's a question of how much reality do you want in your fantasy?
Yeah.
Because
I can't see my reality, please. I'd love to be able to teleport.
Yeah, that's great. Someone invent
unfortunately,
teleportation, please.
Someone get Apple on the phone. No. I suppose when we're talking about representation as well, I suppose another thing as well is disabilities too is something very much that should be talked about too when we're specifically referring to representation, because again, it's only recently in Final Fantasy that they're getting a more varied representation of people actively living with disabilities.
I think I could probably count like 3 characters maybe who appear to have a disability or live with a disability. And, well, none of them, as far as I'm aware, are queer in any way, but you never know. Again,
No,
the devs
but
don't
again,
necessarily want to define that.
no, but at the same time, the representation of, well, how's the best way to word this? People who don't necessarily fit a standard norm being represented. Because spoilers for the most recent patch, there is a character who is depicted in a wheelchair, and that is the first and arguably one of the most blatant depictions of disability that came to mind. Without going too much into spoilers, there is very prominent main characters who, through story events, lose their ability to, see. People go blind. You have other characters who, this is a very Final Fantasy specific one, but obviously lose their ability to use Aether. And I know for us that's not really necessarily an issue because, as Emily said, the world was rude and didn't give us teleportation. But for someone living in Final Fantasy's universe, it's an intrinsic part of how they get around. And I know, obviously, not very standard, but it's debilitating all the same. And it would be kind of nice to see a little bit more, of a spotlight on some of that representation.
Yeah.
It's quite good, I think, at representing some of these issues in slightly roundabout ways, I suppose, but ways that are applicable to queer players, queer and disabled players in this case. Like the one you mentioned about not being able to use Ether. Like you say, it's a little odd when you first think about it to think of that as a disability because, it's here's the magical go juice and this character can't use it and fine. But actually you look into it a little more deeply and it's represented in a way quite similar to the way a disability might be presented in other media anyway. This character is not the character is impeded by it, but not to the point of being of losing their own agency over it. To do the things that they do in their day-to-day life, to do their job, as it were, they need some extra help. And how they get this extra help actually changes over the course of the story. And it's an interesting thing because without that help, they are a lot less able to do the job they're trying to do. We're talking quite broad terms, I suppose, because we're trying not to say who it is, but I don't know if it would be better if we just didn't made it obvious. We just said it.
I mean, we've gone through the effort now of trying to be as subtle as I can, so we may as well stick with that.
You don't get to know who it is. You have to work it out. Haha.
This particular storyline happens in the base Shadowbringers story, so 5.0. But yeah, so there are a little kind of elements of that weaved through, as I believe Petra mentioned. One of the characters loses their sight. They do get obviously magical plot device sight, but it's not really laid on as thick as it usually is. See also Daredevil.
In that case, it's pointed out that this magical sight the character has is something that is actively dangerous to their health.
Yeah. Yes, it is implied through the story that it is something that significantly shortens their lifespan. And again, it's a fantasy setting. We unfortunately don't have magically sourced sight for the blind, as nice as that would be. But again, we are in a fantasy setting. We are taking into account, fantasy scenarios.
Yeah. It's the nice thing about that particular plot point is that it is something that is meaningful within the game's lore. It's not something that's just a throwaway, oh, this character is blind, but don't worry, it will never matter because we're going to hand wave it away. No, it has mattered and likely will matter more in the future, potentially, which is an interesting and useful way to take it, I think.
I feel like gaming as a whole, though, I know it's got a long way to go, but they are gradually getting better at representation and broadening the spectrum, because just to pull another example, Elder Scrolls again, they're online, Elder Scrolls Online, they have quite a few disabled characters in there, characters represented in wheelchairs, and it's just, I think gaming as a whole is going in the right direction, but that isn't to say that there isn't a long way to go.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, what you've got to remember is we talk about, people with disabilities, we talk about queer people, we could talk about people of different real-life races and in-game races. We're all real people, unless you're in-game, in which case, sorry, you're an NPC. But aside from that, we're all real people. We all want to play games as much as anyone else does. So, let us.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
I guess just to kind of return to the overall point for a second, actually, this game's quite good at that. It is quite good at going, if you are queer or if you are disabled, if you are, not necessarily interested in the standard presentation of the player character in a lot of these games. You play a shooter or you're playing a 6 foot tall, 6 foot wide, muscular, beefy man that's going to shoot things with a gun, unless it's Doom Eternal, in which case you will pet a bunny, which is nice. There's variation, right? It's games like to pick their player archetype. One of the kind of things that came out of E3 that was most striking about this, I think, was the Final Fantasy Origin game. I apologize, I don't remember its full title right now. Which got a reaction, shall we say, from the internet at large, because actually the characters were so generic, they were so set to type. And in a game where actually, if you look at the directly preceding game, you look at Final Fantasy XV, although the characters are all male, they were quite different. If you look at Final Fantasy VII Remake, they've got quite a diverse cast of characters and they characterize them really well. The female characters are not all the same. The male characters are not all the same. It's nice. There's a lot of difference between them, a lot more representation. Of course, Final Fantasy VII particularly is pretty well known for having a particularly notable sequence with the honeybee in, which I personally was terrified of playing because I was very much afeared, very, very much scared of what they were going to do to it when they brought it into an HD world. Worth noting, it is brilliant. It's so good. It is one of the most openly, brilliantly queer sequences I have ever seen in a video game, and it is an absolute must play. If you have not played that game through far enough to see that sequence, please do. It is wonderful.
Does this mean I have to get Final Fantasy VII Remake now?
I'm afraid so.
Ugh, fine.
I know.
But to get back onto Final Fantasy XIV and why we like it.
What do you mean? What about all of our sidetracks?
No, let's get on topic, guys. I guess just there's still a lot of things that it would be really cool if we could get the devs to do. If we could get the devs to do, I say as though I have ultimate power over them. If the devs could do this as a gesture of kindness to us. Yes. And I think for me, to be quite honest, just having queer characters that are actually textually queer that you can't deny, that would be great. Please, just a couple. That'd be great.
Yeah. That's honestly, that's the ultimate thing, I think, is rather than having to infer it from the subtext of the game or from clues, even if they're quite blatant clues, right? We would love to see more prominent characters that are more blatantly coded as queer. That would be nice.
Yeah. And we've mentioned before things like removing gender lock on clothing, even though that would be an awful lot of dev work, because obviously they're having to do that with Viera and Hrothgar right now. It would still be great if we could get the gender lock removed on clothing. Or how some clothes have slightly different ways that they look, depending on if you're playing as a male character or a female character. I would love it if we could just have a toggle. So you could have the stereotypically male outfit, even if you were a female character. Because one thing that annoys me is I like Red Mage. I like the Red Mage 70 artifact gear. And on the girls, it's got a little skirt, and on the guys, it's got nice trousers. And it's I just want the trousers.
I think another good example of that is the Valentine's event outfits. I think it was, from last year, where all male characters got this absolutely gorgeous checkered suit. And then the women got a dress, and there was no real option there.
Yeah. It's I know they're trying to remove gender lock, but can you start with this lot first, please?
I think one of the things that would be nice to see, honestly, is as much as removing the gender lock is something that they are doing and they're doing a good job of, we're still seeing new clothing added to the game that is still restricted by gender. You've still got like the Valenciennes outfit, for example, as mentioned. I would love to wear that suit. My female character, I play a Vieira, so we have worse problems than that. Let's be honest. Give us hats, give us hats, give us hairs. Thank you. But I'd love to have more suits available to us. I'd love to have that Valenciennes suit, especially because it's now, I believe it's now a paid item on the Mog Station, isn't it? You know, like I suppose if you were to make a broad, sweeping statement, and therefore one that's probably not quite true in all cases, anything that you buy on the Mog Station shouldn't be not gender locked, and all of it should work on all races. Really, if you're paying real money for it,
realistically, it would be great if everyone could wear everything. But at the very least, when you are paying good money for things on the Mog Station, you would hope that they, at the very least, would be free for anyone to use. Because I know there's definitely outfits on there that I want to use and unfortunately can't.
I think there's even are there am I wrong in saying this? Are there gender locked emotes? I'm thinking specifically of the male Mikote squat.
Yes, I suppose that leads back to the idle poses. It's another one of the assets are there. It would be nice if they opened up some of that to other races and obviously genders.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier the Dark Knight one.
Yes.
That's an example of it where it's separated by gender. I think most of the idle poses for the different classes, and I think the victory and prepare for battle poses as well can be different. Usually it's only slight, but it's still a difference.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting, obviously, they do need to have subtle differences anyway, just because the proportions of the characters are a little different in some cases. So they do need to make some tweaks and some unique changes, just so they look right, so it doesn't look a bit distorted. There are plenty of games, I imagine, where you could play a very small character or a very tall character, and the animations get slightly warped out of being quite workable. It's a little uncanny valley, just because it's designed for a particular thing and scaled.
Current in-game example of that is on the likes of, say, Aura and Elzen, the slightly more stretched character models. You will see subtle things like outfits, textures slightly disintegrating because they're stretched that little bit too much that doesn't look quite right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because they do try quite hard to avoid that. Whereas in something like World of Warcraft, they just texture the character. They just stretch it. That's something that's accepted. Same thing, I think, as clipping is accepted in Final Fantasy XIV, where, especially if you're a Vieira, I'm not bitter, by the way. There are certain things that just will clip with your character, with your hair, or with your with your body, just because, or your ears. That's because that's an unavoidable fact of having 40,000 items within the game, and like 7 different bodies they've got to apply them to. But it would
be a lot of work to make it unified in any way or more flexible in any way to everyone. It'd be great if they could still do it occasionally.
I suppose one thing they could do, because I know we partly brushed upon it with people editing, something I think that the mod should, or the developer should really take more advantage of, is looking into, I know it's necessarily not going with the game's terms and agreements, but looking into the modding community and seeing what people want and taking some inspiration from there. Because I know, again, obviously, they're not allowed in the game per se, so we can't endorse them. But people's ingenuity and ideas are limitless. And I feel like if they sat down and took some time to look at what people want from there and take notes, because it's happened in the past with a lot of games, it could really go a long way to making the game more what people hope it to be.
Yeah, good example of this in terms of reacting to the should we say player contributed features, which just to reiterate, they are against TOS, so it is better not to use them, but obviously we know people do, right? But things like G-Shade was a big part of that, was being able to add color filters, adding depth of field, adding like stickers and frames, and they're all features that are now in the basic game, in the game itself, in the core game, that you can access through the GPOS interface. So it's now available to everyone. which is great because it means you can have it on PlayStation as well. So it makes a lot of sense to continue down that path, not just for things like, okay, can we put some stickers on GPOs, but also, could we think about, so hit one of the, I made sort of oblique reference to this earlier, but there is a mod out there that allows you to use, have a much more androgynous character model. You could go some degree there by allowing you to choose a female character, but actually moving the breast slider all the way down, actually past what is now 0, so that they don't have visible breasts at all. Which, if you were trying to play a character that was, for example, non-binary or even male with a feminine appearance, would be a useful thing to have. And that's the sort of thing that would be great to be in core, because it's not involving brand new models. That really is just something that they would need to tweak how the sliders work.
Mm.
And in general, giving us more sliders would be great. I know, again, appreciate, we're asking for things that are easy to ask for and hard to implement, but the more features that we get for customizing our characters, the more flexibility we have to build characters that represent us, allow us to explore our identities in a much more comprehensive way.
I feel like a lot of our points do just come back to representation when you boil it down, really.
We want more. We want more. We want more.
It would be good if we could have more variety in the character creation with regards to non-binary genders. I think honestly, just not having your pronouns linked to your character's gender. It could be a little box in the character creation where you say, okay, I'm going to play a male character, but I want to use they, them pronouns. That would be something that would be really great to see. But again, this is kind of a translation issue because I don't actually speak Japanese, so I can't verify this, but I heard somewhere that Japan doesn't really have pronouns in the same way as we have them in English, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So to use an example here, because I don't really understand the language to explain it well enough without embarrassing myself, to be honest. They don't have pronouns in the same way that English does. So one example is the original Metroid manual of the NES game released in 1985. Brand new. No one knew what gender Samus Aran was yet. In the Japanese manual, because of the fact that they do not use gendered pronouns, they were never referred to Samus Aran as he or she. So it was left implied, deliberately, it has to be said. When that manual was localized into English, the assumption was made, and for 1985, not entirely unreasonably, that actually they were going to use the he, him pronouns for Samus, which we all know now to be incorrect. So the way these things work within the game does very much differ between the different languages in the game. That said, there is that mechanism in the game to switch between, for example, they in the English, they'll refer to you as master or mistress, and then your last name. I believe that same mechanism is used in all of the localizations.
Yeah.
But
It's
where
just that
applicable,
was
it'd be useful to, yeah.
Oh, sorry, you go.
No, I was going to say where useful it'd be applicable to be able to choose which one you would like, independently of your character model.
That was basically what I was going to say as well. Yeah.
Great minds.
Yeah.
Or
Great
single
minds
brain
think
cell.
Great minds think alike, but fools really differ.
Yes, basically, at Rainbow Materia, all of the staff share a single brain cell, and we don't know who has it at any given point.
We don't know who has it, but I like to think that it's at least here for now.
For now.
Hopefully.
That is how we know Amy doesn't have the brain cell today.
Look, I'm doing my best with what little I have. But to get back on topic a little bit at least, I guess what things, practically speaking, could the devs actually do? Because it's all well and good saying, oh, can we have a pronoun option? Oh, can we have non-binary genders? What stuff could they actually practically do in the game?
I think it's a commitment thing, isn't it? Some things that they could do, the pronouns thing, if they wanted to, they could add that. That's an engine feature. at some point in the game's code, they decide whether to use the masculine phrasing or the feminine phrasing, and you get to, they at the moment that is just tied to player gender. So theoretically, and obviously I am not a developer for this game, so I am speculating wildly, by the way. Theoretically, they could add that slider quite easily. Also, that toggle quite easily. And that would be something that's quite simple. You could just add it as a step in the character creator, allow you to change it through the I can't remember what it's called now, the way you get to change your hair and stuff, right? Things like the non-binary genders, that's more difficult. You're going to run more firmly into engine limitations. And then things like when we say we want more options, we want this and that and the other, ultimately that's a people problem. That is they don't have enough people working on the game. They don't have enough money flowing into the game's development to do all of these things. They are already having to be very choosy about what gets added to the game. So
I think it's also very important to take in the current environment of the world at the moment, because we are, as much as I wish we weren't, in the middle of a pandemic where a lot of these developers are working from home and they're doing the best with what they can. So I think we do also need to take a step back. And as much as we say we'd like this and we'd like that, because some of these things would be great, I think we need to really appreciate what they've done for us, because they have very much stuck their neck out. And I know we try to get back on track as best as we can, but the likes of Soken in particular, I know a lot of people are familiar with recently. He's announced at the end of the most recent FanFest that doing a lot of the music for the most recent patches, he was in hospital battling cancer. And it really goes to show the dedication that the devs are putting in to this experience for us. It is probably part of the reason why it is such a good experience. It is such heartfelt work from the developers. And it's great to hear now that Soken is almost back in full remission. But it's just... And I suppose this will lead into one of our later points, but community as well. I remember being in game when this was announced and being in Limsa with so many people, and just the sense of, I'm going to say, both admiration and heartbreak at the same time was just something I've never really experienced in gaming, because everyone was just pouring their hearts out. People were, I'm going to go and say, in virtual tears over it, but like they've given us so much. So
literal
as much...
literal cheers.
I wasn't crying. You were. Shut up. So no, I think as much as we say we'd like all of this stuff, I think it's really important that we take that time to say thank you to the developers, because I mean,
Absolutely.
Without them, we wouldn't have any of this. So
yeah, we've made quite a few points so far. We have more points to make, I think. But if you were to take one thing away from this, it's the Final Fantasy XIV gets it right for queer gamers because the developers care. Actually, truly, genuinely care, not care through a PR filter. They will do things that aren't necessarily the most statistically vital. They might not make statistically the greatest of sense. I mentioned female Hrothgar before. The various censuses that you can find on player populations tend to show that actually Hrothgar aren't the most popular race, and I believe, in fact, Yoshida has in fact said that actually he's there isn't a huge amount of demand from players for Eorzea or female Hrothgar. Not that you would believe that if you looked at Twitter straight out of FanFest, to be honest with you. But the demand is there. That's why they're doing it, because they care enough to go, look, we know that this is going to affect 5% of our player base rather than 50%. And that's they have to make that decision every day. Do they focus on something that's going to make MSQ better, or are they going to focus on something that you're only going to see if you've played 4,000 hours of the game and you've very deeply invested in some specific niche that hasn't been current in 3 years? It's they have to make that decision every time. The decision that they tend to make tends to be not just the numbers, but also based on what does the community want, what's going to be good for the game, what's going to be good for the players. They're more interested in keeping us happy than the pure mechanical pursuit of our subscriptions, which is why the game has so many subscribers, ironically. Yes. So we mentioned it. Let's move on to it, I think. Let's talk about the community of the game. Because we talked about the devs, we talked about the mechanics, but arguably, you could have the best developers in the world, you could have the best game in the world mechanically, it could be brilliant, the best story in the world. But actually, if the community, the people playing the game, the people you're going to be talking to, if you're going to be hanging about in Limsa, who is going to turn up and what are they like, you say that's server dependent. Actually, what is the community like in Final Fantasy XIV?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I mean, the very blunt way to boil it down is you're all lovely and we love you all.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this is one of those cases where your experiences may differ from our experiences.
Mhm.
Like, depending on the server you're on, sometimes you might find friendlier people, sometimes you might find people who just don't really care. There's all kinds of different things. You might find people who are outright hateful, and you might find people who are just generally really lovely.
Yeah.
So it's one of those cases where I think it really is going to depend. But one thing I have noticed is that, generally speaking, the games masters at least try to keep the game and the community good. Usually, most of the time, they at least give an
Usually, yeah.
attempt,
I
which is
mean-
honestly more than some other games do, probably.
Yeah, they're human and mistakes happen, and I know things have happened somewhat recently in the past, and I think no one's infallible. Be
No.
that us as players or them as game masters or even developers. So
Especially
But no.
the game masters, they're not formless blobs, are they? There are going to be people with their own opinions. There are going to be people with their own interpretations on how to handle situations, which is why, obviously, the fairly infamous at this point, role-playing in Party Finder thing happened, where there was a game master that interpreted the terms of service differently than how we had been understanding it before, made, moderation decisions based on that. Ultimately, that was corrected, which was good. And generally, compared to a lot of games, if you report a player who is being unkind, shall we say, they're very likely to deal with it. It's very likely that you will get suspended or put in the GM jail, or at least have some kind of consequences for your actions if you are openly toxic in the game and you get reported for it, which is good because you can't take that for granted. So many games don't have the moderation or the breadth of moderation, because bear in mind, there's a lot of players playing this game. You need people that can look after the whole player base, not just little tiny bits of it, which is where so many services fall down. But the fact that they actually do, they have that coverage, they have that commitment to, actually, we're not going to, coddle the players. We're not going to let things slide because, they pay a sub, but, they're playing the game, but our numbers, they go, actually, do you know what? If people are toxic in this game, if people are going to be, making others feel bad, making them not enjoy the game, that's how you lose subscriptions, right? Not by getting rid of the elements that actually are trying to cause problems. And it's the fact that they do that and the fact that they are committed to that is an incredibly vital part of the fact that actually this game is, it's pretty welcoming to us. And it's nice.
They get rid of the toxic parts of the community. Although, to be honest, they can only do that if you report it.
Well,
Or if
yes.
they happen to be in the right area, which I don't know if they really would be. I don't know exactly how they work. But if you report it, you could be relatively certain they'll probably do something about it.
Yeah, that's the nice thing. I mean, you do have to report it, but with a game with, what do they say, 22 million subscribers? You can't have eyes on every conversation in every instance, everywhere, all the time. It's not practical. So, as much as I'd rather it be more proactive, I appreciate that's not within the realm of reason, shall we say. I mean, that said, I suppose if you move on from the game masters to the community itself, one of the nice things about the game, especially for queer players, but again, this is a little bit of this applies to everyone, but queer players will notice it more widely, I think, is the community's kind of nice. In general, they're generally, like, you can walk around with an LGBT free company tag, and most of the time, no one's going to really pay much attention. know,
No,
no one's really. He's quite rare to have abuse hurled at you because of that. Sorry, Etro.
no, not at all. I'm disagreeing.
Mm.
Yeah.
I do wonder if I've noticed that the community feels somewhat mature. And I know we kind of discussed this before the stream and we couldn't work out a particular reason for it, but it feels like the community is a bit more mature than other games would have on other games communities are. And like maybe it's because it's a subscription-based game, so you have to have your own income. So that means that maybe some of the younger people weren't able to play it. Maybe it's because it's a role-play game and they tend to be slower, so you get more patient people. But
Coming from that too, something we discussed in prep for this too is it is a bit of a slower burn when it comes to this kind of game. And with younger players, they want to get into a game and they want that feeling of satisfaction and they want those endorphins from, getting into a game, doing what the game's purpose is. Whereas with role-playing games, it's a much slower burn and you're working up towards it. And that's the kind of thing that might just appeal to a more mature audience.
Yeah, not necessarily in like biological age exclusively, obviously, but very much it's an attitude thing where if you're committed enough to play the game anyway, I wonder if there's a connection between that and actually being a little bit more willing to listen to your fellow players, shall we say?
Yeah.
As
I mean,
much
I
as
think
that happens.
to an extent, there is a somewhat amount of monkey see, monkey do. Because I know from my own experiences, coming into the game, even back because I started back in 1.0, even back then when I started the game, everyone I spoke to was so welcoming and just anytime I needed help, there was always someone there willing to help and genuinely wanting to help because as a community, we live this game vicariously through others around us as much as we play it ourselves because, again, good game. And I know for myself, playing the game and having that initial good experience kind of it fostered the feeling in me of seeing a new player and wanting to give them the same kind of experience I had. Like I see a new player and I get excited for them because I know what stories I had them, and I know how great the community can be for them. And if I can give that new player the same kind of support and opportunities and gaming experience that I had, then I'm gonna absolutely go on my way to do that. And I think a lot of the community feels the same.
Oh yeah, I adore the fact that this game has a term for new players, Sprout, but it's not derogatory. In fact, it's generally affectionate.
and sprouts
that-
need to be watered.
Yes, it's a nice bit of symbolism, I think.
Yeah.
We've said before, I think in private that we really wish they'd change the mentor icon to a watering can rather than a crown. I think it's obviously that particular subject is a tricky one. Little off topic again. But, the game does openly try to foster being kind, being polite. They do very much push for, being nice to new players, helping people through dungeons. Explaining mechanics is a thing that is broadly expected, if not always followed. It's quite surprising when you're playing, particularly if you're doing something like a dungeon and players are being disrespectful. It's pretty notable, right? It's because it's a somewhat rare, which is, it's nice that that's a surprise when it does happen.
Yeah.
I
mean,
mean, most recently. Sorry, what Amy?
Just very quickly, I could probably count on like maybe 8 or 9 fingers the amount of times that I've had a bad experience in this game, and I've been playing it for several years now, almost daily, probably a lot more than I should have played. But I've been playing it a lot, and I've had very few bad experiences.
Yeah.
Go on, Edric.
I find generally that there's the good will always outweigh the bad. And I know this goes outside the game a little bit, but on the likes of Twitter too, you'll see a lot of stuff because I don't know how many people would be familiar with a very prominent after being quite.
Troy, could you say that again? I think you cut out for a sec.
Perfect. No bother. I don't know how many people are familiar with the relatively well-known WoW gamer Asmongold. he recently announced on his Twitter that after being quite critical of it, that he'd be picking up the Fantasy XIV for the first time. And there was, unfortunately, a lot of backlash because, again, he'd been critical. But a day or two after, I went back and had a look, and what I saw more than anything was support. And it was a nice kind of indicator of how supportive the community is and how willing people are to look past things. And as critical as he is of the game, people were fully open to, welcoming him in and giving him tips and things like that. It's an all-round good community.
It is. One thing I've noticed, and again, this is a little it's a little tangential, but it does tie in, is the game does actively try to make it quite difficult to be too elitist. And again, this is one of those things where life finds a way, right? But it does happen. Unfortunately, there will be dinosaurs. But for example, if you look at, say, if we go back to one of the points we made early on, glamour being the true end game, right? The fact that most glamour options are accessible to most players. And even if you have things like ultimate weapons or emotes that you got from buying a $200 statue or even relic weapons, there are multiple ways to get to that level of status within the game, which means that it matters a lot less than it does in other games. There are games where if you do not have best in slot gear, and it has the appearance of best in slot gear, you are looked down upon because you're not good enough at the game to get the correct makeup. Whereas in Final Fantasy XIV, it doesn't matter. You could wear the starter gear if you wanted to. You could wear, every piece of fully augmented Eureka gear if you went through that.
If you went through that grind.
My condolences if you did.
Yeah, but there's a certain level of respect that comes with that if you see someone in that gear. But it's not the only way to do it. You can go and get, a rare crafted glamour, for example. You can go and get, a crafted glowy weapon or a relic weapon, or even just standard, tombstone gear, and just put together a nice glamour in the glamour closet from stuff that's readily available. It doesn't really matter. It's something that you notice and remark upon. Oh, wow, they've got the Epic of Alexander weapon, fantastic. Oh, But then you see someone with, they're just running around with the Skaven weapon, for example. Doesn't matter. It's not a negative connotation, And in fact, if it's not a nice looking glamour, you get that very same. Oh yeah, that's a really nice glamour. The fact that fashion is such a big thing in this game could have turned into something that's a bit, tetchy, but didn't. And it's really nice to see that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think the fact that there's such a wide range of glamour is really great. Just one other thing that I find is really nice is the fact that the game lets you have LGBT friendly and LGBT specific free companies. And I've been in games where the very thought of even saying the word gay gets you censored. So being able to openly say, yeah, I'm part of the community, this is the free company that I'm part of that literally has LGBT or something like that as their tag or in the name of the FC, that's amazing to have.
It's like such a weird thing to be grateful for. It feels like the sort of thing
Yeah.
that should be normalized, but it isn't. There are still senses where you say the word gay, and you as you say, you'll get hit by the block for it.
Mm. So just the fact that you can do that at all in game is amazing, really.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's fantastic, and it's nice that there's also a huge variety of external communities as well. Most of the, look, we're sitting in the single biggest Final Fantasy Discord server, having a chat with you all because we've been invited to. Because actually, the administration of this community was kind enough to recognise Pride and run a fundraiser for it, and invite us as representatives of the queer community, for which we apologise. No, I'm kidding. No. But we've been invited to speak and to be heard, and actually, that level of acceptance and understanding and willingness to kind of include us as a faction that is important or a community that is important is really nice. There are so many queer communities, queer friendly or queer aligned communities out there. There are so many ways that you can enjoy this game, and whether you want to go and find something queer specific, like a queer specific Discord, for example, wink wink, or even you just want to be in some a free company that's welcoming of queer players, or players that where some games may not accept them as readily. You might have to search really, really hard to find a little niche within the game that will mean that you get to play that game without having things yelled at you. And it's a lovely thing to be able to take for granted in this game.
Just the fact that we can kind of take it for granted is amazing in and of itself.
It is. So I think that's I think shall we start to wrap up then? Move on to our Q&A section.
Yeah, go on.
Because go on in. Before we do, is there anything else that you would like to have said but haven't had a chance to yet? Very decisive, thank you.
Yeah, nothing extra for me, at least.
Excellent.
No, nothing I can think of that won't lead into another 20-minute sidetrack.
Yeah, we were
Let's
asked.
get some Q&A in first before we do a sidetrack.
Yeah.
All right. So if you guys have any questions, obviously due to the nature of this discussion, we will not be allowing the raising of hands, as we do not want the less upstanding citizens of Discord to be pouring in, as we've already been dealing with them for the entirety of this event. So those of you who have been listening, we appreciate you for not spamming our direct messages.
For those who have been doing that, come on.
So if there's any questions, feel free to drop them in main stage discussion, and we can ask them.
Absolutely. Feel free to be abroad if you want to. We're more than happy to kind of answer general questions. So if we've said a phrase that you don't understand what it means, or you've got a general question about queerness, feel free to ask it. We're quite happy to kind of address things as best as we can. We're not trying to blind people with acronyms here. So we're more than happy to explain things. If there's anything you'd like to ask on that subject.
Yeah, feel free.
Here,
we will try not to ramble on too long if you do.
I'll start with a question of while people can either think or type, or maybe they don't. I don't know. Did you learn you were part of the LGBT community before or after starting Final Fantasy XIV?
Ooh.
Good question.
Etro, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it was kind of at the same time. I feel like I went through two very separate realizations. Because obviously if it's not evident from the accent, live in Ireland, and I live in quite a rural area where LGBT and queer folk aren't necessarily all that accepted. So for me growing up, kind of coming to terms with that's very difficult. You see people come out, doesn't go great. It kind of, you shut yourself in a little bit. And I feel like because of some of the people I interacted with in Final Fantasy, and it was, for me, as a teenager, it was a glimpse into outside my little rural town in a world that was a little bit more open-minded. So I think my realization was a very much IRL type thing, but it has its roots in the community of Final Fantasy to an extent.
I'm just looking at the main stage discussion channel, by the way. You've your tendency to know everyone has flared up again.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
That's wonderful. Okay. I'm just seeing one coming in. How do you feel about Bnui?
Bunny.
Yes.
Bunny.
Yes.
Always bunny. I mean,
Go for it.
I'll just quickly answer the question that Ine asked a little earlier. For me, like basically always known that I'm bisexual. It's like a thing that I knew literally when I was a kid. I think I was like 7 or so when I first realized. Because like, you know, when you're a kid, you want to play like mummy and daddy. I wanted to play mummy and mummy, as an example. So it's something that I've kind of known for a long while, and even though I've like only come out to a couple of people in person, it's still something that's like I've always been very aware of. And I remember when I played Final Fantasy XIV, I started playing it with some friends, and they all dropped off. And then after a while, I ended up like looking around and going, I kind of want a community. And I ended up finding an LGBT community, and that's what kept me going in the game. And even though I didn't stick around there for very long, it still sort of helped me feel a lot more comfortable being, you know, openly queer in the game.
Yeah. I think for me, it was it's a bit of an odd one because being trans is kind of an extra layer of confusion on top, shall we say? But I think I had some idea of my identity, but I didn't understand it very well. Like it wasn't really clear to me whether I was a boy or whether I was a girl or whether I was none of the above or what suited me. What do I want to be, right? And I spent a lot of time looking for an answer to that question, as I think so many queer people do. And I came across Final Fantasy, and I quite like the art style. I quite like, I'd heard that it was very, very good. So I started it up. I started the free trial, as so many of us do. And what I found was actually, at the time, the area didn't exist yet. So I managed to get relatively close to something that I liked. And through playing the game, I think I mentioned this as part of the discussion itself, but I spent a lot of time dressing my character and trying to understand how to present the character in a way that felt right to me. So it's almost very tightly intertwined for me. It wasn't really, Final Fantasy was the key to me understanding what I kind of knew, but not really.
Yeah, I definitely feel that as someone who's a trans woman herself. I've known for a long time. Like I knew since I was 5. But in the age like of the 90s internet, obviously that wasn't something that was really publicized everywhere. And I did start Final Fantasy XIV as a male, and over time, as I started to meet more and more people, like especially at live events, like going to PAX, going to FanFest, and meeting all of the wonderful LGBT community members who wanted to come say hi to me because they knew me for whatever reason, kind of helped push me over the edge, I think. So I started my transition at 31, which is obviously a little late compared to a lot of people you hear nowadays. But I definitely think personally, for me, Final Fantasy XIV was the catalyst that helped me, come out to be who I am.
The nice thing as well is that I think is as you said very rightly, having a community that didn't much care. I had the opportunity to test how I wanted to present to the world within the game, but also within the community, within the Discord servers, in some cases the voice chats. I would come along and I would say, "Hello, my name is Emily," and they would go, "Hi," which is nice, And it's something where making it not an issue meant that I could just deal with it myself, and I could work through it in a way that was a lot more healthy than when I deal with it by public trial, shall we say, as sometimes happens still.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I started my transition 2 months before COVID hit. So,
Oh dear.
Gosh, that must. Oh.
It
Do you
was
think that?
a
Do you think
blessing
that's
and
a
a
benefit
curse.
or a
I
detriment?
think it was a great benefit. And in general, it let me go through the most awkward phases of my transition, basically in private, because I didn't have to go out in public in front of people. And I got to start my transition and start exploring who I was with Final Fantasy XIV players rather than people out in public spaces. And even when I was out in public spaces, face masks are a trans woman's best friend. I don't know if you know that.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was interesting. So sorry, I kind of went off topic there. Let's get back to topics from chat. How shall we? Um, question here from Alexos. Would you say your guys' identities have been more solidified because you met other LGBTQ players in the game?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah. It's
Do you know what?
for me.
Oop, go
Go on,
on
Amy.
it. Go on, Amy.
I'll just go quickly. For me, it's like I said, I've kind of known that I'm bi literally my entire life, but it's not something that I've been willing to say to other people. But because I've been able to meet other queer people in this game, I feel a lot more comfortable saying it. I feel a lot more like maybe at some point I can come out to the world and sing it from the rooftops or whatever it is that people do when they come out. I don't know. But it has made me sort of feel a lot more comfortable in myself and more like I know who I am.
Yeah, I
Very much
think being around more, it's a weird thing to say. It makes it feel like a little bit of a more mundane factor of my life. Therefore, bringing it up feels that little bit less scary because growing up, it's a big thing for a lot of people. And seeing other people and it not being an issue, it kind of takes that, problematic view of it and it kind of just makes it a little bit smaller every time everyone doesn't care. It's
Yeah,
just
very much.
it's kind of it's accepted and it kind of makes you think, well, you know what, if the community is willing to be this accepting, then what is real life going to be like?
Sure. And the nice thing is because the community is so broad within Final Fantasy, the nice thing is that if you are not one of the first four letters, should we say, if you're not necessarily strictly within the lesbian, gay, bisexual, or very much, like as I alluded to earlier, I am not a hyper-feminine woman by any means. Actually, a lot of the transness in the world is very much focused on hyper-masculine trans men, hyper-feminine trans women. They don't really know what to do with non-binary people. In Final Fantasy, everyone you meet is free to express themselves. So you get to meet a lot of different kind of people. So for me, for example, and again, this was a little bit through the character, but this was also a little bit through the community itself. I got to understand that the fact that actually, do you know what? I don't particularly enjoy wearing dresses in real life. It's fine. Doesn't matter. But for a while, I was like, am I trans enough? That age-old question. And it's definitely the community kind of going, yeah, okay, actually, there's so many different kinds of people who are playing this game, and they're all just themselves. It doesn't really matter. That's a huge part of it for me.
Okay, let's see. Next question here. The Trevor Project does a lot for mental health, and you have mentioned the ways that the game helps people with their identity. How do you think the queer community in Final Fantasy XIV helps with people coming to terms with their identity and the mental health factors involved that some people struggle with?
I mean,
Oh, that's a good question.
That is
Yeah.
a good question. Who's got the brain cell?
None of us. That's the problem.
no, that's left.
I mean, I think, and again, community. It's going to kind of come back to community. You end up, I suppose, in a lot of cases, you kind of end up forming your own little support groups in a way. You see it, it normalizes, it becomes more mundane. You feel more comfortable in yourself, and arguably, in the long term, that makes your mental health a little bit more of an easier struggle. But no, I do feel like the connections people make through the game kind of do become, especially again in like periods during a pandemic, they become a support network of such. I know I personally have been using it as my social outreach during this because it's the only really one I have. So that social aspect for me has been what's kind of kept my mental health. I'm going to say somewhat stable. I'm not going to say it's stable because that would be a lie. But no, it's definitely been a massive factor in keeping my mental health where it is now.
I think there's a lot less fear of backlash for your identity. Kind of, I think we've obviously touched on this a little bit already, but if I'm openly queer in the game, it's staggeringly unlikely that I'm going to get people yelling at me for it. And that lack of walking around with the fear of okay, who's going to call me names today? I mean, it frees you up just to live your life a little bit. And the fact that the Final Fantasy community is willing to to do that, is open to that, is a huge win. It's an untold benefit for my mental health, dubious as it is.
I mean, I agree with both of you. I'm not really sure if I've got much else to add, but yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
as well as that too, back to the, I know they don't really have not many options, but there is just a lot more acceptance, and like people are more willing to use the likes of like proper pronouns and things like that too. It's never really given much of a second glance. If, say, in the unfortunate instance, say someone gets misgendered, it's usually just the simple thing of, well, no, actually, I use these pronouns, and that's kind of it. It's just usually, oh, okay, and then it's a move on.
Yeah. It is kind of community dependent there, especially when you sort of start digging around the free companies. There's variable attitudes to it, but generally, you're a lot less.
Unfortunately,
less.
everyone's individual experiences will vary. Unfortunately, as great as the community is, we can't necessarily brush it all with the same stroke as much as we wish we could.
Indeed, yeah. Okay.
All right. Next question. You mentioned that playing Final Fantasy XIV helped broaden your horizons. What are some of the differences you've seen between servers when it comes to interacting amongst queer people?
Oh,
Yeah.
I think it
I'm
can
not
be very server dependent sometimes. So just an example for me, I usually play on Phoenix, and Phoenix is kind of like the official, unofficial queer Europe server. But I've also got a character over on Chaos, I think on Moogle, and there have been a few times where I've had to report people for not being very nice. Of the 8 or 9 times when I said that I've had to report people or I've had bad experiences, I think more of them have happened over there than they have on Phoenix. So I think it can be like kind of server dependent, and well, yeah, I guess it's just server dependent. Yeah,
It's hard to say really without like tarring entire sections of the community with
true. Yeah,
a broad brush. There are stereotypes, and there are stereotypes that I know. I mean, I certainly band around as jokes every now and again.
I mean, a common one is, and just one word, Balmung. Moving on.
Yep. But they are stereotypes, so it's difficult to kind of give an honest and serious and reasonable answer, kind of, because it is so variable. But I think there is definitely a thing where there are certain worlds where queer players too tend to drift. It's in the same measure as like there are worlds where players who speak different languages tend to drift. If you look at Chaos, Louisoire has a lot of French language players. Phoenix, I think, is known for having quite a few German players, for example. And that's one of the sort of unusual things about the European servers, particularly. And we know it happens in Japan as well. There are servers that are almost exclusively Japanese speaking. There are servers that actually have a large English speaking presence as well. And it kind of ends up being the same way, but with attitudes towards the queer community as well.
All right. So the next question was already discussed earlier, but I can ask the second part of it. So what's the next clothing item you want the gender lock removed on?
Ooh,
I know what my choice is.
go for it.
There's a Mog Station outfit that is my favorite outfit in the world, and it's the princess dress. It's absolutely amazing on like female Rogadine, and also it looks so adorable on like female Lalafels as well. But guys can't wear it, and I want guys to be able to wear it. And also there's a male version of it, which I think is like the prince's outfit. I don't know the exact name, but I would like to be able to, buy that and wear that on my female character. So that would be my choice.
Yeah, for me. Sorry, go on, Extra.
Nope, no, I'm just agreeing with Amy. Go right ahead.
Fair enough. For me, I'm going to be a stereotypical lesbian and go, I want more suits. Because there still isn't really a really good waistcoat. I know that a lot of the players I see, they have this really lovely waistcoat on the male characters, which is gender locked, and female characters can't have it. I want my Viera to be able to wear that waistcoat. because it looks so nice, and it would look so nice on female characters. They just haven't unlocked it yet, and that's what I'd want to see next.
Yeah, I think personally I'd kind of have to agree with Emily on this because I'll be honest, I feel like male characters get a bit of an easier time with some of the outfits. Or at least I know a lot of the outfits appeal more personally to my own aesthetic, so I don't necessarily see something like, ooh, I would like that. But no, I do think unlocking some more suits for female characters would be a good first step.
Okay, let's see here. Next question is from Momo. What advice or reassurances would you give to people, new or old, who want to join and partake in the community and its events, but might not know where to look or may be nervous to reach out?
I think the main thing is just get stuck in, just join in with any part of the community. Because of the fact the community is generally really, really nice, it's not hard to find somewhere where you can fit in quite easily. I think in terms of events, keep an eye on the subreddit. If you're interested in queer events specifically, obviously, Rainbow Materia does have an announcement channel where we like to announce these sorts of things. We would like to do more on this subject, particularly, of course. But in general, the community is quite good at advertising these sorts of events. And even you don't have to kind of really dig deep to find it, which is nice.
I think as well, since all the community is so, not maybe directly, but most of the communities are through some means or another interconnected. Even if you join any community and you find, well, this community isn't quite for me, it tends to open a lot of their doors because through that community, you'll often hear about others that might suit you better.
Yeah. If you're looking for specific communities, one thing you can check is you can check Party Finder. Because a lot of communities, both in and outside of the game, will actually advertise through Party Finder. I think we do that occasionally as well. We also have, what is it, what are they called?
The Fellowship.
That's the one, thank you. We also have fellowships, which is a way that our community helps reach out to people. And honestly, there's also I think, free company search thing. So there's a community finder that Final Fantasy XIV has actually set up so that you can search for specific type of communities. And I don't know practically how well that works because I'm in an FC that I quite like, so I'm not looking to leave anytime soon. But that may be something that you can look at just to find someone. And then to a certain extent, you are going to have to sort of bite the bullet and jump in and just get on with it. Because I've been in the same sort of situation where I've been in a completely new place, had to think like, oh gosh, how do I fit in here? And the only way that I was able to do it was to look around a bit, to try and find different communities. And eventually I managed to finally settle on a couple of good ones. But it can be a bit of a hit and miss. It can take a while. Try not to get disillusioned if it takes long. I guess that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think
it's kind of like anything. It's just not everything is going to be for you. That doesn't mean the thing that is for you isn't out there. So
yeah,
keep looking.
I think
really,
my nan used to say it takes all sorts to make a world, and it does. And it doesn't necessarily imply anything like bad or wrong. Like people aren't going to be necessarily terrible, but you might not find the perfect fit for you first time, and actually, okay. There are so many options available, and once you've got an idea of a bit of the community, you've got a much better idea for what to look for going forward.
All right, I do believe that's all of our questions. We are currently at 2 hours and 3 minutes on the recording. Oh, wait, we have one more person typing a question. Okay, go ahead.
More.
Go ahead, go.
go for it.
No pressure, type as fast as you can.
Start the timers now.
If I'm still questioning, are there any resources or places you can direct me to?
That is a jolly good question.
Good question.
I don't have a good list of resources to give away like right off the bat, I'm afraid. I think that's something.
Yeah, it will probably benefit you to look up like any local things because we don't know basically who's actually listening into this. You could be from any country in the world. and some countries are going to be more open to it than others. But the Trevor Project would be a great place for you guys to start. As a reminder, we are running this.
Donate.
Please donate.
Yep.
Yeah, we are doing this to help raise funds for the Trevor Project because they do a lot of good work. And they're more of a crisis one, as I understand it. But still, if you're questioning, you may be able to contact them and find out. Other than that, I don't really. There must be loads of specific ones.
I mean,
You can always come to us and ask.
yeah. I mean, that's kind of leads into my next point is, leading back to the last question, try and find a community. Totally, something like Rainbow Materia, totally not a plug, and join communities like that, because you'll find a lot of people are willing to be, a shoulder to give some advice. People are happy to, be there to support and, educate, and again, an all-round good community. So if people are questioning or aren't sure, I mean, other than the likes of the Trevor Project, and there's a lot of good resources online. If you have some specific questions, but again, find a community that you feel comfortable in. Take a little time to settle in, and then ask.
Yep. If you have any questions on that nature, especially if you're questioning, and I'm a bit more comfortable making this plug because we're not the only community that offers this by a long way. We have a support section. And one of the reasons that we have that support section is so that people can join us and they can ask questions about their gender or their sexuality or their orientation in any form, any part of their identity. And, it's tagged as a place where, look, you're going to get serious answers, you're going to get taken seriously, you're going to be treated with kindness. As I say, there are quite a few different communities within the Final Fantasy sphere with this sort of offering. We are but one. So it's definitely worth reaching out to those. If doing it on Discord is something that you're comfortable with. It's kind of difficult to give a very specific answer to that one because it depends on who you are, where you are, what you're looking for, what you're trying to get out of it, really. So yeah, always feel free to ask more specifically in any of the supportive communities, and I'm sure you'll get someone willing to hear you out and answer your questions.
All right, I do believe that is a good spot for us to call it. This is by far the longest of the stage events we've had thus far. I will find a place to upload this. Our SoundCloud is apparently full because apparently they don't give you much on a free tier. And this event is now 2 hours and 7 minutes. So I will find a place to upload this, and it will be available for people to reference and go back and watch and listen to if they want. So if you guys have any closing remarks, you can go ahead and make them now.
Be gay, do crime.
Yeah, something like that.
No, I don't think there's a massive thing to add, really.
Yeah, I would say, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for hearing us out and asking a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
I think we weren't quite expecting to go on for this long, but we had a lot to say, apparently.
Yeah. Who would have guessed?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, from me, I guess it's the same thing. Thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in. It's been really nice to see the audience come in, listen to us, engage with us. Obviously, it's a little bit nerve-wracking, addressing a community as large as this one, especially if you're queer and you know that there are people out there quite happy to call you names. And the reception we've had has been really lovely. Thank you so much. I guess the only other thing that I would want to say is just, especially right now, with the world the way it is, remember to be kind to yourself. Remember to be kind to others. Give your pets lots of attention for me. And it's okay to be yourself, whatever that might be. And it's okay to not know, whatever that might be. It's entirely up to you.
All right, and that will wrap up our third event. We will have a fourth one being announced soon, so be on the lookout for that. We will be regularly running these events, so I hope people continue to stop by, and it's fun, always fun engaging with you in chat. So we hope to see you for the next one. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks.